torture, scorcher. Let's get busy drunk off the dictionary word called respect. Shake your fingers, and we can eat some fish and chicken sandwich and talk about the civilized wisdom of Solomon. What's wrong with that? The fat back, the ham hock food. Lifestyle is not juicy, but polluted. It's time to get the stuff diluted. Salute me, all you soldiers. We need to change our lifestyle. We need to change our lifestyle right now.
We want to go to this African statement where I have this African confession on tape that he know we are two different manner of people. We're talking about the seed of Ham, and that they sold us into captivity, and that they was cutting our ancestors' heads off, okay, and that they was eating, okay, the heads because they were a bunch of heathens. Just like it says in Jeremiah the 10th chapter, follow not the ways of the heathens, and how he specifically distinguished that he come from a different bloodline, a different ethnic origin from the so-called Afro-American, Jamaican, Haitian, Puerto Rican, Panamanian, Cubans, Mexicans, okay, so on and so forth, and the so-called black, brown-skinned Native American Indians, okay, and all the brothers and sisters in the shanty towns of North, Central, and South America of so-called Negroid descent.
The problem is, you Israelites, you black people in this country, what do you say about them? You call them animals or something?
I call them inferior. I call you slaves. We turn you into slaves, and when we didn't need you no more, we kick you out of Israel, and out of Egypt and out of Africa. We sold you to America, and that's where we want you to stay, and we don't want you back in Africa again.
Now, you black people in this country, it's time for you to wake up and realize that this stink doo-doo eating African does not care about you. He's not your people. He hates you, and that's why he sold you out of Africa. And you admit that, right? You're admitting that today on
the white man is not a devil. We sold you to the white man.
Right.
If we had sold you to our devil, you would not be alive today.
Now let's get back to your devil. You did.
We don't want you to die yet, so we didn't kill the devil.
Chop our heads off in slavery and all that, and sacrifice it to your God.
We ate it. What do you mean sacrifice it?
Say it again.
We ate the goddamn heads when we chopped them off. We didn't sacrifice you. We used to eat your assholes over there.
In Africa?
Yeah.
Before you sold us.
forgot that we used to eat the men over. We used to eat people.
Sold us to America.
And then when we got fed up of your flesh, it was no good anymore, and we found it was unclean, we decided to sold you into slavery to get rid of you. In case you multiply and subdue the earth over there.
Okay, now, but let's get back to the point, because you're trying to get away from it. Why wasn't he able to stop the hand of the Lord, the Israelite God, the God of Israel, from delivering his people from such a powerful, mighty nation? How come your God didn't do that? Let me tell you. How come he didn't stand up for Pharaoh and save Pharaoh? Because we said, drown in the Red Sea.
We said, get your assholes, you Israelites, out of our goddamn country and take your God with you. And we don't want to see a box of you anymore.
That's a lie. You were forced to let go the children of Israel.
No matter how we were, it doesn't matter. We were glad to see you how
I know you was glad. You was glad because you was getting your asses kicked.
And you came back.
You was glad.
You out again.
You was glad because you was getting your asses kicked.
No, when you came back, we decided to sell you.
You was glad.
You know what? When they came back, when you came back to Africa,
you was glad
we
because you was getting your asses kicked. That's why. Okay, now listen.
We were beating your assholes with whip and turning into slaves. How could we get our asses kicked? We were beating your assholes with whip. I'm making you burden, making you carry, making you into slaves. We were whipping your asses every day.
Right, but you know what? Okay, right. He said that the problem is you Israelites, you black people in this country. What do you say about them? You call them animals or something?
I call them inferior. I call you slaves. We turn you into slaves, and when we didn't need you no more, we kick you out of Israel, and out of Egypt and out of Africa. We sold you to America, and that's where we want you to stay, and we don't want you back in Africa again.
So, there you have it, right from the horse's mouth, from a real, true, so-called African, from the seed of Ham, that knows the true history, what took place, what really went down, pertaining to our ancestors that were sold into hardcore slavery. He specifically distinguishes himself from our forefathers that were sold into hardcore slavery. And he tells you straight up, yes, we're talking about this real, true, okay, Hamite, so-called African, that knows the true history of what really took place in slavery, and he understands that the people that was being sold was not his people pertaining to our ancestors. They were the seed of Shem, and he specifically says that they were Israelites, not Africans, and how they were cutting their heads off and sacrificing them to their gods. And they were also raping the woman, and how they sold us, okay, to the Portuguese, the French, the Dutch, and the British, just like it says in 1 Chronicles, the 9th chapter, in the 1st verse. And so all Israel were reckoned by genealogy. And he recognized that he comes from a different genealogy, because everybody that has melanin on their flesh don't come from the same nation. What you Egyptologists going to say now? What you so-called bootleg African historians going to say now? You're going to keep teaching them Imhotep lies? You're going to keep teaching them these African lies? You're going to keep deceiving them, telling them that they're descendants of the Egyptians when we don't come from the Egyptians, after hearing this testimony from an educated so-called African who comes from the bloodline of Ham, who knows the real deal. That's right, the real deal, pertaining to how his ancestors sold our ancestors to the French, the Dutch, and the Portuguese, and pertaining to how he know that the people that they sold into slavery was not their people. As you just heard with your very own ears, this real Hamite, so-called African, says that their ancestors were selling Hebrew Israelites, not Africans, not Egyptians, not Muslims, not Chinese, not Japanese, but Hebrew Israelites from the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So after hearing this testimony of truth, what you going to do now? You're going to keep teaching Egyptian lies? You're going to keep misleading the people? You're going to keep deceiving the people? You're going to keep worshiping sun god Ra? What you going to do, sisters? You're going to keep saying Ashe, Ashe? Or are you going to deal with the true facts of the matter? That you've been taught lies, you've been bamboozled? Or you're going to keep upholding deceit? Or you're going to keep worshiping sun god Ra, who ain't no other than wicked satanic devil Nimrod, who is nothing but a demon from the seed of Ham? Let's read this definition once again from the Compact Bible Dictionary. Ham, the youngest son of Noah, born probably about 96 years before the flood, one of the 8th person to live through the flood. He became the progenitor, the forefathers of the dark races, because there's many dark-skinned races, but not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, who were the ancient Babylonians, the Libyans, and the Canaanites, who were very satanic and evil and wicked. The wicked satanic Canaanites, which you call Africans here today, they used to have sex with animals, 4-footed beasts, and they used to sacrifice their kids, their sons and their daughters, and they used to burn them up alive to this so-called god called Molech. But the reality of the matter, they was worshiping the invisible satanic demon forces, and they was into all kind of unnatural sexual satanic intercourse. That's what you claiming to be a descendant of? That's a bald-faced lie. And it was prophesied in the book of Joel, chapter 3, verse 6, pertaining to how these African, so-called African kings would sell our ancestors from Dahomey to the Gentiles, to the French, the Dutch, the Portuguese, so on and so forth. And it states this, and the children also of Judah. That's who we are a descendant of, which goes back to the bloodline of Noah, Abraham, Samson, Ezekiel, Daniels. And the children of Jerusalem, which represents the Israelites, or rather the Israelites, have ye sold, talking about the African kings on the west coast of Dahomey, have ye sold, talking about the so-called Egyptians who once had us in captivity as well, have ye sold unto the Grecians, the children of Judah, the children of the Israelites, the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who are not Africans or Egyptians, who are known today as Afro-American, who are known today as Jamaicans, who are known today as Brazilians, who are known today as Afro-Peruvians, who are known today as Afro-Ecuadorians, who are known today as Panamanians, who are known today as Afro-Puerto Ricans, who are living in Loiza, Puerto Rico. The children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold unto the Grecians, that ye may move them far from their border. Let's go back to the Dahomey, Hamitic, kings that sold our ancestors into slavery, which we are not descendants of. Dahomey was a country in West Africa, in what is now the Republic of Benin, which for 2005 recorded in the Caribbean newspaper, it states how Sidney Poitier went to visit what they call Benin, which was known as the Kingdom of Dahomey, where our ancestors were sold. And this is what it records for the Caribbean Life newspaper for January the 3rd for 2005. It says the actor Sidney Poitier shares a solemn moment with a Beninese child at the Tree of Return in former slave trade. Town was called Uda. What does that sound like? Judah is a corrupted version for Judah. What does that signify? It signified that the bloodline of the Hebrews once dwelled in what they call Benin. Okay? Actor-director Sidney Poitier shares a solemn moment with a Beninese child at the Tree of Return. Okay, in the former slave trade. Town was called Uda in Benin, West Africa, where our forefathers once dwelled before they were sold. Benin, West Africa. Africans marked for shipment as slaves to Brazil, like we may mention to you before, and the Caribbeans are said to have followed a ritual circling the tree 3 times in order that they may return after death. So you brothers that's into the movement of Rastafari, you got it wrong in the Caribbeans and the Brazilian brothers and sisters and the brothers in what they call North America, so-called African America. You got it wrong. Here's the clue. The town where our forefathers once dwelled on the West Coast, it was called Uda. That's a perverted term for Judah, which is really supposed to be spelled with a Y. It has nothing to do with Africa. We're not Africans. We're not Egyptians. These are lies. And neither are we descendants of the Ethiopians. The Ethiopians are descendants of the ancient Babylonians. They come out the bloodline of Semiramis and wicked Nimrod. Just like in 1966, Haile Selassie told you brothers in Jamaica that he is not the King of Kings that the scriptures is talking about. But you insist on promoting this falsehood. Let us continue with the African kings of Dahomey. The African Dahomey participation in the slave trade. The Africans, the seed of Ham themselves, played a role in the slave trade. The Africans that participated in the slave trade sold their captives or prisoners, Hebrew Israelites, of war to European buyers, selling captives of prisoners. Let us continue. Okay, was common practice among the Hamite Africans and the Arabs, which we are holding on to their philosophy here today. That's foolishness. Why would you uphold the philosophy of a culture that enslaved your ancestors? But the Most High is going to clear up this confusion, okay, when the time comes. Okay, Arabs during that era. Let us continue. And it states this. It says the prisoners, not the Egyptians, not the Africans, not the Hamites, the Hebrews, who are known today as Negroes, Jamaicans, Haitians, Puerto Ricans, black Native American Indians, the prisoners and the captives that were sold in the 1500s and the 1600s were usually from neighboring or enemy ethnic groups, which means what? They were from a different ethnicity, origin of a different bloodline, coming from a different nation. It says these captive slaves were not considered as part of the ethnic group. In other words, they was not considered to be relatives of the Dahomey kings who came from the bloodline of Ham. Okay? They understand we were of a different origin, of a different bloodline, of a different nationhood. That's why it says this right here. Let's read that once again. It says these captive slaves were not considered. They were not regarded as part of the ethnic group of the tribe of the kings. Held no particular loyalty to them. That's why they was raping the women of our ancestors. That's why they were splitting their belly open and stumping the baby out alive. Like this picture here is declaring. Like a Portuguese or a French or a Dutch or a British. Here's the African whipping the Hebrew and not the Egyptian or the African. Here's the Arab who was part of the slave trade. And here's the Hebrew being branded by the European slave master. You guys are telling falsehood lies. Let's read that statement once again. It says, The prisoners and the captives that were sold in the 1600s were usually from neighboring or enemy ethnic groups of a different nationhood, so we can understand. These captive slaves were not considered as part of the ethnic group of the so-called African Hamites. All tribes and kings held no particular loyalty to them because they were not their people. Africans were not selling their people. They were selling another nation of a total different ethnic origin. Most of the slaves were obtained from kidnapping or through raids, occurred at gunpoint. Let us continue. It says the king of their homies sold their captives in the Atlantic slave trade rather than kill them in annual customs. To a degree, because some of our ancestors' heads were chopped off and cut off. And they used to eat the heads, just like we played this testimony from these true Africans, because they were heathenistic and they were not our people. It says kingship cult of sacrificial offering. These include an emphasis on human sacrifices in large number. Through the ancestors of the monarch, human sacrifices were not only made in time of war and pestilence, calamity, and on the death of kings and chiefs. They were also made regularly in the annual customs believed to supply deceased kings with fresh groups of servants. Not Egyptians, not Africans, but descendants of the Hebrew bloodline. Okay? Listen real good. 4,000 wider. This is another corrupted term for Judah, or rather Yehuda. This is talking about our ancestors. 4,000 Yehudas, for example, was sacrificed when Dahomey conquered the kingdom of Wida, because we had a kingdom in Dahomey, which Rudolph Windsor speaks about. That's why they don't talk about Rudolph Windsor and don't respect his historical studies, because he talks about this Hebrew bloodline. Okay? The kingdom of Wida, which means the kingdom of Judah, in 1727. 500 was sacrificed for Adazu II in 1791. Sacrifices for Gizo went on for 4 days. That's why it states this in 1 John, the 4th chapter, the 1st verse. Believe not every spirit, but try the spirit, question the spirit, investigate whether they be of the Almighty Father. Because many false prophets are gone out into this world to deceive people, to manipulate people. Just like the 10 Commandments, as we view this clipping that I'm showing you right now. Here you see these beautiful sisters from this clipping, which is a subliminal message. These are not Africans. These are not Egyptians. These are descendants of the Hebrew Israelites. But here you have the Egyptians playing the part like they're European people. And here you have this stele. If I'm not mistaken, they have this stele plaque in the British Museum, which records the Israelites, which is the corrupted version of Israel, the Israelite stele of Egyptian pharaoh Meneptah. In it, he claims to have defeated Israel, not Egyptians, in the 5th year of his reign, 1207 BC, accordingly to the newly widely used shortened chronologically. This is the earliest recorded mention of the 12 tribes of Israel on the monument. And here's an illustration of that plaque, which the archaeologists have found during their research of excavation. This plaque signifying the King Meneptah the Pharaoh, how he took down the Israelites in the 5th year of his reign, 1207. And they have this, if I'm not mistaken, in the British Museum. This is nothing that was manufactured here today. So it's a bunch of lies that they're promoting, that the Israelite was not in captivity under the Egyptian Pharaoh. That's why you have in this 21st century, you have this tribe, these brothers in southern Africa called the Lemba tribe, who assert remote. They claim, they state they come from Hebrew ancestry, and they denounce the fact that they are Africans. They say we're not Africans. We come from the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And they clearly state how they're descendants of the Hebrews that was in captivity under ancient Babylon. descendants of Solomon, Samson, the King of Kings. And they clearly distinguish that they don't come from the seed of Ham. And I posed this question to Dr. Jeffries, and he told me a lie. He told me that they learned this from the European Jew. That's a falsehood lie. This is way before they came down there and enslaved the people and forced them into this fake Christianity nonsense. When the Valley of Sinner could no longer sustain its people, they fled eventually, reaching southern Africa, where over the generations they assimilated, both biologically and culturally in their appearance. The Limba are indistinguishable. Listen real good. The Limba are indistinguishable from their African neighbors like them. The Limba retain genetics markers of a Hebrew ancestry that dates back 1,000 years. This is way before the Atlantic slave trade took place. Also, the archaeologists, they found a list of slaves, including Hebrews from Egypt about the time of Joseph, 1700 BC. And here's that list that the archaeologists have found.
On the torture scorcher, let's get busy drunk off the dictionary word called respect. Shake your fingers, and we can eat some fish and chicken sandwich and talk about the civilized wisdom of Solomon. What's wrong with that?